Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with, let's get going here, Essential Works by Composer X. Composer X is Shostakovich, and these are essential works for beginners. I want to be clear about that because, as usual, I give a list of things and then you all pile on with your own lists. And I understand that because you want to participate and you have very good ideas. Sometimes you have wonderful ideas. Quite often you have wonderful ideas. But this is a list for beginners. It's not supposed to be representative of Shostakovich as a whole. That's a different question, isn't it? This is, what do you need to listen to get a sense of what the guy is, his essence. And then from there you can branch out left and right. And Shostakovich is one of those composers who I think this is particularly applicable when you think about, because there is an enormous body of work, beginning with his Fifth Symphony, essentially, that represents his mature output post the trauma that led him to at least temporarily renounce his earlier, more difficult and acerbic and pedal to the metal kind of style. He got back to it in a way, gradually, in pieces. And it's also not quite his late style, which is extremely creepy and death-obsessed and gloomy and austere and sparse and concerned with, eternity. Eternity as seen from the point of view of somebody who is quite atheistic, actually. And so that stuff you'll get into. It'll happen. But if you don't get the core, the meat and potatoes, the middle mature stuff, where he was grappling with dealing with the Soviet regime that was pushing him to try and be populist and socialist realist, but he was doing it in a way when he did it that was completely his own. And also to be expressively true to himself all the while. It's an enormously complex question. And it's not a question, the complexity of which I think beginning listeners need to worry about. It's interesting. You can read biographies. You could read my book on Shostakovich symphonies and concertos. Feel free, have a read. I think it's pretty good. But I really think that musically speaking, the reason that he's important musically is because of his unbelievable feeling of compassion for the human condition. The tragedy which is sometimes all but overwhelming, and which he either overcomes sometimes, ignores sometimes, agrees to soldier on nonetheless sometimes gives into. This is the kind of stuff that I want you to think about when you listen to his music. It's about not the fact that he was dealing with the Soviet system, or there may be secret messages in some of his symphonies to his friends or other things. None of that matters. What matters is the visceral, immediate, emotional impact of his music. And it is visceral, and it's immediate, and it has a tremendous emotional impact, often a devastating emotional impact. It's not easy music from that point of view, from an expressive point of view. It may be somewhat easy harmonically or traditional in form and in shape, but what his message is gut-wrenching as often as not. And so you have to be prepared for that. And once you've gotten through that, you can expand to your heart's content, because you'll understand what he was doing, what the essence of his message was, really in all periods of his life. His earlier stuff is sarcastic, sardonic often, much more harmonically adventurous than his later stuff, although still usually very listenable. And his later stuff, he was very ill, and he was approaching death, and it's about fear and dread and uncertainty and what's going to happen if there's a great beyond. All of those issues. He was such a mensch, just a true human being who felt intensely and expressed it at all phases of his career, but particularly in the works on this list that will really give you a sense of what those elements are, what the emotional quality of his music is. And some people will respond to it very well, some people won't. It all depends. So let's begin. I chose 7 works. We don't have to do dozens of them, and I think they're really quite representative of his persona, not all of his compositional styles necessarily. So let's begin. Symphony number 5. That's where you got to start. It's like Beethoven. You begin with the 5th. Shostakovich, you begin with the 5th. The 5th was composed as a Soviet artist answer to just criticism. Well, he didn't really believe that. He didn't think the criticism was just at all. He had to say it. But the symphony itself represents his answer to where he, as a composer in his time and place, fits within what was expected of a Soviet composer who wrote symphonies, which were supposed to be heroic expressions of victory snatched from the jaws of defeat. Now, because it's victory snatched from the jaws of defeat, you get to do as much jaws of defeat as you want. You could be as depressing or as creepy as you want it to be until you get to the end, where the victory has to erupt. And the question in the 5th Symphony is that victory a real victory? Or is it a forced, false victory? And a lot of that has to do with the interpretation. If you can play it perfectly straight and make it happy and dazzling, or you can take your time a little more, slow it down a bit, and hit the dissonances and make it stab at you like a needle, or the Chinese water torture. It can go both ways. And that's one of the wonderful ambiguities of music generally. You know, it doesn't have to appear the same way in different performances. It doesn't have to appear the same way twice. You may feel both ways about it. I do. I enjoy performances that are incredibly triumphant because the first movement is gripping and dark and spooky. The second movement is a jolly, sarcastic little scherzo. It's lots of fun. The third movement is an incredibly hushed, unbelievably intense, elegiac sort of threnody, meditation, incredibly beautiful with a stillness that's really a special moment in 20th century music. And the finale, well, it starts out kind of bombastically and then recalls some of the mood of the previous largo. It's the slow movement, adagio. It's a largo, actually. Very, very slow. And then slowly builds itself up to the final peroration. And you tell yourself, tell me, tell anyone you want how you think it perorates. But the point is just it should make you think. And the emotional journey is tremendous, tremendously wide-ranging one, and powerful and impressive. It's just amazing. So after the 5th Symphony, once you've digested that, and take some time, do digest. You need to digest. First Violin Concerto. Now, the First Violin Concerto was a work that he hid until after Stalin died in 1953, because he was afraid it would get him in trouble. And it is, I can understand why. It's an amazing piece of music. It's in 4 movements. The first movement is a nocturne, a spooky, very eerie night piece with very clear thematic shapes, but very ambiguous harmony. You don't know exactly where it's going, and full of sort of half-lights. There's a bit of celesta, a few shots on the tam-tam, some harp. It's really very, very cool. The second movement is a scherzo, and it uses some of Shostakovich's Jewish thematic material. Shostakovich used Jewish music because he said that Jews suffered so long that they learned to express their suffering in dance music. And that's what Shostakovich loved, the ambiguity. The idea that it's a dance, but is it a happy dance? Well, not really. And this particular scherzo is maniacal, absolutely maniacal. It sounds like gibbering demons half the time. Then it comes together in a dance, and the babbling insanity returns. Very, very disturbing. The third movement is one of the most beautiful, noble, pure, lyrical expressions in all of music by anybody. It's a passacaglia. A passacaglia means a repeated bass line. In this case with a horn fanfare on top of it as it's introduced. And then you have variations on top of the repeated bass line. And this is unbelievably beautiful and sad. Sad because it's so beautiful. sad because it's so noble, because it's so much more elevated than the music that's around it. It's just so, I can't even begin to describe it. You have to listen to it and let it just hit you. And the most amazing thing about Shostakovich, and this is true of the Fifth Symphony and the Violin Concerto, is that although he has a reputation as a sort of screaming, loud Russian who writes bombastic finales and all that, the most intense moments of his are almost always scored very simply. The climax of the Largo and the Fifth Symphony, it's almost just strings. He doesn't use any heavy brass at all. And the only percussion he uses is a xylophone. In this Passacaglia, it's the same thing. It climaxes in music which is just for stringed instruments, but it encompasses the world, a world of sonority, a world of emotion. And after that, there's a big, long, 4-minute long cadenza for solo violin alone, a meditation on all of the themes of the concerto that works up to an insane fury, followed by a snickering burlesque finale. And the burlesque makes fun of all the themes we've heard so far. I'll just tell you right now that the opening of that finale, bum ba da 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 da, is the very opening of the whole concerto. First theme you hear the violin, and it's amazing, and then the basses too. That's the principal theme from the first movement, but you may not recognize it, played fast and in this sort of gawky and biting way. And the theme of the Passacaglia comes back at the end too, and the xylophone. I mean, it's all there, and it just goes flying to the end. It's one of the great concertos of the entire 20th century, an unbelievable work. Next, some chamber music. Shostakovich was a master at chamber music, and we're starting with Piano Trio number 2. Now, the second piano trio is, how do you describe it? I mean, all of this music is intense, but the finale is based on a Jewish tune, a very simple Jewish dance, 2 of them actually, that alternate. And it's one of the most high-tension pieces you've ever heard in your life. I mean, it will have you on the edge of your seat. If you think chamber music is in any way less powerful, less expressive, smaller scaled than like big orchestral music, listen to this trio. It's totally incredible. It's based on the very opening, which is played by the cello at high harmonics notes. Da 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 da. That comes back at the very end, and the music finally ends in peace. It ends in peace, and with it's so touching. It should have you in tears. It's unbelievable, absolutely unbelievable. One of the great chamber works of the 20th century, and one of the most expressively poignant pieces of music anybody ever churned out. Next, we're going in a totally different direction. Shostakovich wrote a lot of music for the theater, and a lot of film music, and a lot of light music. And his light music is really kind of fun, and it's in a very different style from his heavy-duty stuff. So I chose his Suite for Variety Orchestra, also known as the Jazz Suite number 2. It's got like a lot of little 8 or 9 numbers in it, including that famous waltz that's used in all of the commercials that we've heard recently. You know, ya da 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 da, ya da da da. That thing, you may know it. Not from how I sing it, but you may know it. And it's also a very nice, easy to listen to avatar of his earlier style, which was full of that combination of modern harmony, but in light music format, you know, to give the music that sardonic edge that he always loved visiting. So you can hear that here. And this also will give you a taste of his film music and all of his music in lighter genres generally, because the way he worked in film and other things is mostly in closed forms. In other words, he wrote pieces that had a beginning, a middle, and an end for whatever scene he was illustrating. It wasn't open-ended music. And aside from that, he had certain, well, you'll hear here because there are several waltzes. He had like waltz music, polka music, adagio or romantic music. He had a style for each kind of situation he had to illustrate, and he reused stuff all the time, from film to film or from suite to suite or whatever. So if you listen to this piece, you have kind of like a Shostakovich's greatest hits of that style, the popular style, the lighter style, the burlesque style, his earlier music. It's all in there. So that's a nice way to sample it and to get yourself acclimated to some of his other styles or idioms. So after that, we're going the opposite direction. String Quartet number 8. Now there are 15 string quartets. Every single one of them is in a different key. Every single one of them has a slightly different form. This is true, by the way, of his symphonies and concertos too. No two have the same large-scale form, which is a remarkable thing. People don't talk about that. People don't talk about Shostakovich's handling of form. They don't talk about how masterly he was, how interesting and inventive he was in the service of this incredible expressive impulse that he had. The 8th quartet is another gut-wrencher. It uses the same tune in its second movement as we hear in the finale of the trio. Da da dum bum bum ba da 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 da. It's another one of those Jewish dance things, and it occurs here. It occurs in the trio. The quartet came later, and he was Shostakovich at that point in his life was supposedly close to a nervous breakdown, near suicide. He was forced to join the Communist Party for fear of his life at the time, or he wasn't forced. I mean, his motivation is a little bit murky, however it goes. But he wrote this piece, and there's no question it uses his motto. He had a musical motto represented by the initials of his name, translated into German musical note names: D, E flat, D, S, C, letter C, and H, which is B natural. So it's D, B flat, C, right? D, S, C, yeah. C natural, B natural. Da, 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 da. That's what it sounds like. Da, 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 da. And that's all over this 8th quartet, too. As it is the next work, the 10th Symphony, considered by many to be his greatest. It's an astonishing work. Again, he stuck it in his desk drawer and only unveiled it after the death of Stalin. He was supposed to create, because his 9th was light and fun and enjoyable, and everyone wanted him to do a big, splashy choral apotheosis, like You Know Who, in his 9th Symphony. And I can't say who. I'm not wearing a tie. I have to be appropriate, right? We can't mention that work unless we're suitably attired. But you know which one I mean. It's the one that goes ya da 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 da. That one. So I didn't say it. You didn't see me say it. The 10th was supposed to be where he does that, because he didn't do it in his 9th. He wrote something light and funny, and people were annoyed with him. I'm very annoyed with him. So the 10th, on the other hand, was also just the opposite. The second movement, he was very clear about it, represents Stalin. It's a vicious scherzo in which destruction runs amok. The scherzo is a creepy scherzo that features his tune, da 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 da, over and over and over again. And the finale begins in total darkness, but then genuine happiness, for maybe the only time in any of his symphonies, erupts because Stalin is dead. And you know he's happy because Stalin is dead, because Stalin comes back at the climax of it, going do 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 do. That's Stalin. And then Shostakovich comes piling in on the brass. Ba ba da da, crash with the cymbals, bang with the tam tam, and Stalin slinks off. It's very graphic what's going on in that symphony. Now, you don't have to hear any of those things in it for it to be an entirely successful and powerful expression of an abstract series of, emotions. I mean, the first movement is one of the most powerful that he ever wrote. It's an amazing work, a truly amazing work, and one which you cannot listen to enough. You'll hear constant, total, new, subtle, fabulous things in it every time you listen to it. Finally, last but not least, I want to work that it's the herald of his last period, the 13th Symphony, Babi Yar. First of all, we should hear something of his with voices. He wrote some beautiful songs and song cycles. He wrote a couple fabulous operas, The Nose and Lady Macbeth of Mtsensk. But the 13th Symphony is based on really powerful poetry by Evgeny Yevtushenko, the first movement about the mass slaughter of Jews during World War II. And then each one of those poems is about they're about social justice, basically. The second poem is called Humor, about how the government tries to quash humor because they feel threatened by it, but humor always triumphs. Then there's At the Store, Russian women lining up in the cold to pick up their meager ration of food. The fourth movement, the last three movements run together, are called Fears. It's about people ratting each other out during the terror, the Stalinist purges in Soviet Russia. And then the last movement is called A Career, and it is so beautiful and so wonderful. It's about how Shostakovich pursues his career by not being a careerist. In other words, by being true to himself, true to music, true to humanity, and not by standing on someone else's shoulders to try and follow an upward career trajectory by being a shithead to the rest of the world, which of course was something tremendously encouraged in Soviet bureaucratic officialdom, whether you were a musician or anything else. And it ends with a lullaby which is actually a version of the theme that you hear right at the beginning of In the Store. An incredible work, a powerful, moving work for bass solo, male chorus, and a huge orchestra. And I think it's a fitting way to end your initial introduction to Shostakovich. I would save it until you're comfortable with some of the other stuff here, because you must sit down with it. You must read the words carefully. You have to follow along. They're in Russian. You've got to find a translation, which is easy. If you have a CD, it will come usually with a text and translation. If not, you can find it online easily enough. But wow, what an incredible testament to the courage of the human spirit, and I think just there's a moral to everything that he does. A truly, truly good man whose search for compassion and justice and empathy was unwavering throughout his career. And if you take your time to listen to these works, I can't but think that you'll agree, and you'll have all the tools you need to explore all the rest of his music and get the very most out of it. So keep on listening, friends. Thank you so much for joining me. Take care.